Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I am Mackenzie Bean with Becker's ASC Review. We will begin today's webinar with a 30-minute presentation, and if time allows, we will jump into audience questions. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We are looking forward to hearing your questions. Additionally, in about a week following the webinar, we will be sending you a copy of the presentation to the email you used to register. At this time, it is now my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our presenter. Richa Singh has served in a variety of positions at CollectRx since joining in 2010. Currently, Ms. Singh serves as CollectRx's Executive Vice President. Ms. Singh's responsibilities include developing and implementing corporate-wide sales and marketing, reporting and systems, overseeing the sales, marketing, and account management staff and functions, and serving as the lead relationship manager with the firm's largest clients. During her tenure at CollectRx, she has been instrumental in the firm growing its client base to more than 1,300 providers nationwide. Richa, I'll now turn the floor over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Mackenzie, and hello everybody. Again, I'm Richa Singh, Executive Vice President of CollectRx. I'm happy to be here today to present frequently asked questions in out-of-network. Now, many of these questions come from audience members from the numerous webinars and talks we've presented over the years. And some of these questions, they're basic, but some are intricate as well. And we've organized sections for the different topics that people have asked us questions about. So we'll start with a background on CollectRx first off, and also our out-of-network expertise so you understand why we're in a position to talk about this. Then we will ask and answer frequently asked questions regarding general out-of-network issues, payment processing, policies, specifically out-of-network policies, negotiating settlement offers, appealing your underpayments, and third-party rental network agreements. And our goal today, when we are done, is to answer the most commonly asked questions and familiarize you with some of the intricacies required to successfully run an out-of-network operation. All right, so before diving into these topics, let me provide a quick summary of our experience in out-of-network reimbursement so you understand why, again, we're in a position to address this. Despite our name, CollectRx is not a collections agency, and we have nothing to do with the pharmaceutical industry. Simply put, what we do here at CollectRx is we help providers get higher reimbursements on out-of-network bills. And we don't do this as consultants, but we do it more as experts in negotiating higher reimbursements on out-of-network bills. All right, so CollectRx, we are the only company in the country that's focused on helping providers get higher reimbursements on out-of-network bills, and we've been doing this since 2006. We work with over 1,300 customers nationwide, and we process over more than $1 billion in out-of-network bills each year. And we work with a variety of provider types. So this includes surgery centers, physician practices, hospitals, behavioral health, and labs. Now, to get the results that we get, we rely on two main factors. The first is CRIXIS. This stands for the CollectRx Information Systems, and this is the proprietary data and analytics tool that we've developed to support us as we go toe-to-toe with payers. Now, CRIXIS, it helps us analyze insurance policies, it provides comparable data, and it allows us to track the tendencies and trends of the people on the insurance side. Now, the second factor that helps us is we rely deeply on our expertise, and we built a unique team of out-of-network experts who used to work for the insurance companies and their vendors. So this puts us in a unique position to understand the soft spots in the payer's position and get higher reimbursements on out-of-network claims. Okay, so now first let's start with general out-of-network questions. And some of the questions that are asked today may have words that are unfamiliar to everyone, or you might use a different terminology for the same idea. So before I dive into these questions, first, let me provide some definitions of some of the concepts that are used in these questions today. Okay, and we're going to start with out-of-network, and I know this might sound like a very basic term, but there may be providers that take a mostly in-network position that might not be completely aware of what it encompasses. So a provider that's out of network with an insurance company, they have not negotiated a contracted rate for reimbursement. So when a patient with that insurance is treated, the bill that the provider sends to the payer is an out-of-network bill. All right, the next definition is allowable, and this is the amount that's determined by the insurance company that should be reimbursed for any given bill. Repricing, this is when an insurance company reimburses a provider at an amount that is different than the provider's full bill charges and is usually at a much lower amount. All right, now we have vendors, and those are third parties that insurance companies use to reduce payments to providers. These are known as bill minimization tactics. And payers outsource these tactics to vendors either through negotiating high discounts from providers, or they'll reprice their claims to very low amounts. The next definition is single case rate agreements, and these are also referred to as settlement offers, proposals, or LOAs, which are letters of agreement. And a payer will send a payment offer after services are provided and after the patient leaves the facility, but before the insurance company makes the payment. Now, in return, the provider may not bill the patient for the discounted amount they agreed upon with the vendor in the single case rate agreement. And then finally, we have discounts. This is the amount off your bill charges that both you and the payer agree upon in that single case rate agreement. All right, so now we're going to jump into the frequently asked questions, and we'll start with the first one, which is, what is the #1 key to successful out-of-network negotiations? And it is what we like to call the persistence game. So who's going to win the battle of the wills? The payer and the vendors, they put up all sorts of obstacles to success, and they're banking literally that you will get up and just walk away. And their goal, their sole aim, is to get you to throw in the towel. They know that you're busy, you don't have the time to continue the fight, and just so you know, the vendors, they're paid on a commission basis. The higher the discount they negotiate, the more commission they make. So when you give up, they win, and ultimately to succeed, you must have the persistence to continue fighting for the reimbursements you deserve. So for example, here's a couple tips. So when you're negotiating one of those single case agreements, make sure you respond to every counter offer, because they're hoping to wear you out by going back and forth multiple times in a very short time frame. Now, for appealing your underpayments, a common delay tactic used by these payers is to tell you that the claim is still processing and to check back in 10, 15, or even 30 days. So many providers, they tend to drop the ball after the second or third time that they're told this, but if you stay with it, you can see results. All right, the next question coming up is, if I am currently out of network and there is no third-party rental agreement, is there still a strategy to negotiate? And yes, of course there is. On a bill-by-bill basis, vendors will attempt to minimize reimbursements through either of the following means. So first, they might negotiate a single case rate agreement, which we just defined. And in these cases, you may engage in negotiations with the vendors to maximize reimbursements. And in these instances, you agree not to bill the patient for that discounted amount. Now, the second strategy is that the insurance company, they just simply underpay you instead of first attempting to negotiate your payment. And what they do is they'll just send you a check for a low payment along with an explanation of benefits. And from their perspective, the insurance company takes the position that they've met their obligation in paying the bill in full to you. So in these instances, you need to engage in a full-on appeal process. Okay, so what's the best way to negotiate with payers? Is it phone, email, or fax? So definitely you want to start with phone. Even though the phone can be the most time-consuming, it definitely is the best way to optimize your results. Is it worth the trouble negotiating if we don't see a lot of out-of-network? Yes, you should always negotiate out-of-network bills, because the opportunity to increase reimbursements is so wide, because since the bill is usually allowed at only a fraction of bill charges. So even providers with low volume that have a strong negotiation process, they're able to generate significant additional dollars that would be enough to even cover the cost of like 1 or 2 full-time employees. So think of it this way. If your lowest volume in-network payer came to you and they said, hey, we're going to come and we're going to increase your reimbursements by more than 50%, and that's about the average that we're able to increase for our providers, I mean, you'd take that 50% increase, right? So point here is any additional money is worth it, even with low volume. Can I do anything if the bill was denied for no authorization? So sometimes the payer, or I should say something the payers don't want you to know is that, sometimes, and not all the time, but sometimes you can get authorization after the fact. So don't give up if your claim's denied just for that reason. Okay, so why would I want to be out of network? Basically, it's because you make more money. Out-of-network reimbursements, they are higher and sometimes much higher than in-network reimbursements. And as providers survey the landscape today, there just aren't a lot of opportunities to improve reimbursement rates. Because just think about it, your in-network contracts, they are what they are. And there's limited, if any, opportunity to increase those rates. And with respect to Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements, there really is no opportunity to change those rates. But leveraging higher out-of-network reimbursements represents the last great opportunity for many providers to bring more dollars in the door to improve their bottom line. Okay, so now let's turn to the next topic, which is questions on payment processing. So first question here is, how do payers determine what to pay? When an insurance company sells to an employer group, the employer group has the ability to dial up or down the out-of-network benefits. So this means that the more they pay for health insurance premiums, the more that can be reimbursed. And of course, vice versa, the lower they pay for premiums, the less that's reimbursed. So these dials, they come in at different levels. First off, does the payer negotiate settlements with the provider? And if they do, at what rates will they go to? Second, when a bill is repriced, what's the maximum amount that will be paid? And then third, if a provider or the patient pushes back on any low payment they've received, what should the payer do in this instance? And it can range between what the payers call stand-on data. This means that it doesn't move at all to increase payments on one end to making fairly drastic concessions to eliminate patient noise on the other end. And this is a spectrum. Employers, they can choose to be anywhere along this range, but whatever the employer chooses, the payer has the data to support its decision. Okay, so how can I have 2 patients with the same treatment and the same insurance company, but 2 different reimbursements? And I put these next to each other because they're pretty similar to the last question. Because ultimately, again, it's not the insurance company that defines the reimbursement level. Rather, that decision is controlled at the employer group level. So not only do these groups determine the out-of-network benefits, but they also control the methodology being used to determine the allowed amount. And on occasion, however, there may be a difference even within the same group, so you need to be vigilant in reviewing your EOBs. All right, my revenue cycle team insists that usual and customary is limited to 150% of Medicare for out-of-network. What are your thoughts? So my thought is that there is no way that all payers in an area are limiting all out-of-network reimbursements to the same amount. First off, usual and customary generally is not tied to a percentage of Medicare rates. Determining what usual and customary means is really more of an art, not really a science. I mean, have you ever tried even asking the payers how they came up with UCR? They give you the runaround because they aren't even able to define it themselves. Now, second thing here is that payers are not always forthcoming with pricing, or they just might be incorrect. For instance, one of the instances that we've witnessed is that the insurance company was telling us that reimbursements are at 110% of Medicare rates. But we actually got a copy of the policy, and it said that usual and customary is based off what other providers in the area are charging. All right, and then another thing is that you should keep track of the different insurance policies that you encounter in your area. Again, there's no way that every single payer is reimbursing at the same amount for UCR. All payers have different policies that they sell to different employer groups, and they all have benefit levels that vary. Okay, so the next question is, how do you collect more than usual and customary? So usual and customary is a vague term that you are able to negotiate. You just need to have the data, insurance policies, experience, and expertise to be successful. Okay, so now let's dive into some of the questions that we've been asked on different out-of-network policies. And the first question that we'll start with is, what is a limited benefit policy? Now, a limited benefit policy is one that puts restrictions on the calculation of an out-of-network reimbursement. And frequently, these policies tie benefits to a percentage of Medicare. So it can be something like 100% of Medicare, 150% of Medicare, or somewhere in between. The next question is, what are some examples of limited benefit policies? So you might have heard of some of these. For instance, United Healthcare has something called MNRP policies, and Cigna calls theirs MRCs. Now, both of them limit their reimbursements to a percentage of Medicare rates. And by accepting these patients, you're essentially accepting Medicare rates. So the good news here is that you're typically able to negotiate higher and sometimes much higher than those defined Medicare rates. How do I know if the patient has a limited benefit policy? So you can specifically ask the payer during benefit verification. Okay, the next question coming up is, can cases involving international patients be negotiated? Yes, they can, but there are some nuances that make it different from US-based policies. Now, international insurance companies are more aggressive, and they know it's often difficult for you to find the patient, let alone collect from them. So citizens of another country, they often have a special travel policy with very limited benefits. Also, there are no insurance regulations that the foreign carrier has to be bound by. So, with domestic U.S. insurance companies, we're required to have proper and timely payment to the provider, or else we're fined or otherwise penalized by the state insurance commission. A foreign company, they don't have any of these restrictions. Therefore, there is no incentive to the foreign carrier to pay more rather than less. But again, with proper data, processes, and most importantly, persistence, you can be successful with these patients. Okay, so let's go to the next topic of FAQs, and this is regarding negotiating settlement offers or your single case agreements. And the first question in this area is, given there is no contract, what is the incentive to agree to any of these proposals when the provider is out of network with the payer? Again, you make more money because you are typically able to negotiate higher reimbursements than just waiting on your insurance company to make that first payment. Also, by negotiating, you typically receive payments much faster, and there's a higher success rate in negotiating upfront as opposed to appealing on the back end. All right, the next question here is, why would I negotiate offers from companies like MultiPlan? I expect 100% of my charges. And yes, in a perfect world, out-of-network should be reimbursed at 100% of billed charges. But unfortunately, over the years, these payers have implemented numerous bill minimization tactics, so they only reimburse you at a fraction of what you charge. And you should definitely negotiate these proposals because in reality, if you don't, the payers will most likely reprice your bill to much lower levels than you were offered. Okay, so any tips for negotiating the single case agreements? So I've been saying it throughout the presentation, persistence is definitely key. Do not give in easily if you think their offer is inadequate. Now, another tip is to obtain data to prove that the insurance company's payments are inadequate. You need to be able to argue that the insurance company's reimbursement level is inconsistent with your own history. And even better, if you have the history of other providers in the community, that will help as well. But remember, they the insurance companies, they're tracking everything you do. I mean, they've got it down to the names, titles, and discount levels of everybody in your business office. You can also track the different insurance policies that you encounter, so you have an idea of how the policies should reimburse. The next question here is, what do you think about our strategy of never accepting more than 10% discounts? So candidly, if you have a policy of never going below 90%, or even any set amount for that matter, the chances are that some insurance companies are repricing your bills at a much lower rate. Because the reality here is that some payers and some policies, they won't agree to a 10% discount. And if you do this enough, where you only expect 90% of your charges, for instance, those payers, they'll just stop contacting you to negotiate, and they'll reprice the bill down to what they consider to be usual and customary. Again, a lot of times it's less than 50% of your billed charges. So here at CollectorX, we've been able to, go back and get these insurance companies to start negotiating again, and that helps prevent them in the future from repricing these bills down to usual and customary. So again, getting these negotiation settlement offers, we're able to, negotiate at the highest amounts per that policy. Okay, next one is, won't negotiating aggressively ruin my relationship with these vendors? And I hear this all the time, is that providers are saying that they have a great relationship with the vendors, but that's exactly what they want you to believe. You have to remember that these vendors, they're not your friends. They're compensated on how much money they save their clients, and their clients are the insurance company. They're continuously trying to find new ways to pay you, the provider, less money. Now, you can also think about your relationships in this way. So the vendor's ultimate goal is to negotiate a settlement, right? In the grand scheme of things, and no offense, but I mean, each provider, you're one grain of sand in a mile-long beach from the payer's perspective. On a one-on-one basis, they're trying to make you think you're friends with them, so you think you're getting a good deal, but it's just not the case. In reality, what happens in the background is that these vendors, they do their negotiations, and then they report back to their clients, the insurance companies, by batching all of their results by tax ID number, not your specific name. So in the end, you're just a number, you're not, a name. You're not ABC Surgery Center to these payers. Okay, so are vendors allowed to give me less than a day to negotiate? Yes. When the vendors opt to settle a case through negotiations, they often do so by sending proposals that often have a short turnaround time for a response. And their goal is to put pressure on the provider to settle quickly. And sometimes those turnaround times are real, sometimes they're not. Once we agree to a discount, can the payer change their mind? And unfortunately, this is a yes. So for one thing, it could be that as simple as the payer accidentally sending the claim to be negotiated when it should have been repriced per the policy that the employer purchased. There could also be something in the policy that changes the settlement, for instance, a multiple procedure reduction that they missed. But unfortunately, these signed offers are not binding, and but if you still see any of these discrepancies, you should always fight back. Okay, next question. If we decline a single case agreement, can we bill the patient? Yes, you can. Since you did not reach a deal with the payer, you can do whatever you want here. And on the same line of questioning, if we accept a single case agreement, can we bill the patient for that discounted amount? Now, in this case, you cannot bill the patient for that discounted amount because you've already come to an agreement with the vendor. You also cannot appeal the case if you've signed the agreement, but you can bill for any patient responsibility like deductibles and or copays. Is it better to decline an agreement if we don't agree with the reimbursement amount? So this one's a yes and a no. It really depends on the policy type and how it would reimburse otherwise. So for instance, you may have to accept a lower amount for a limited benefit policy than you would for a policy that's based on usual and customary. Okay, the next question is going to be, is it good to sign up with third-party portals? Okay, so This is a question that came from one of our presentations where we do a section on the portal. So let me give a little background first. And basically, some vendors, they use a portal to send proposed single case agreements to providers instead of faxing or emailing them to you. And providers use it because it's easy, it's more efficient, and so on. But to answer this question, no, it's generally not good to sign up with these third-party portals. What providers don't realize a lot of the time is that these portals, they're set up so you can't negotiate the case. In fact, some vendors, they won't even take calls regarding cases that were transmitted using the portal. Also, you won't know things like non-covered amounts or special policy types. So if it's a limited benefit policy, for instance, and you're trying to go for 90%, it might just not happen. But make sure that you have the time to invest in an effective negotiation when you do decide to cancel the portal. Okay, next topic is appealing underpayments. And the first question in this area is, as an out-of-network provider, can we appeal low reimbursements for claims? Yes, definitely. Every provider should put together a comprehensive appeal process to combat the payers when they've been severely underpaid. What's the best way to successfully appeal underpaid bills? Well, to start, you need resources devoted to appealing cases, so you need bodies to do this. It just won't happen itself, unfortunately. Now, these bodies, these resources, they need data to make arguments to the payers. You also need a plan or a method to your appeal process, meaning you need to know things like when I should write a letter or how to escalate the case. And you also need to be persistent. Surprised I said it again, but these payers and these vendors, they put up obstacles to success. They're banking that you will get up and walk away. They know that you're more focused on treating your patients and just sometimes don't have the time to continue the fight. Okay, so the next question is asking about best practices to appeal underpayments. And you need to have a rigorous appeal process. It is a labor-intensive process to appeal any underpayments and to obtain a higher payment. And in the next couple of slides, I'll provide you with some of the steps of a successful appeals process. So the first step here is the initial intake. You want to ensure that you have the documentation necessary to handle the claim. So this includes getting the UB or the CMS 1500, whatever you bill out on, the explanation of benefits, the assignment of benefits, and any billing and collection notes. Because if you get on the phone with the payer and you need more documentation, you're going to have to hang up and do everything over again. Step 2 is payer verification. You need to contact the payer to verify the patient and bill information and obtain a verbal explanation for the basis of these reductions. Step 3 is strategy development, and you want to devise the appropriate strategy for that claim. This involves formulating the facts and arguments to be made to the payer. Of course, here at CollectRx, we're using our CRIXIS database to assist in this process, so determining a way to aggregate this data is going to be beneficial for you. Step 4 is payer engagement. So you engage the payer and you present the relevant facts and arguments to the payer. But to be successful with any appeal, you need to be able to call every day, write letters every day, escalate when necessary. Sometimes you're going to have to take it to the state insurance commission, for example. But once you fully present the information to the payer internally reconsiders its decision. Typically, at least several weeks will pass before the payer does reach a decision. All right, and then finally, step 5 is settlement agreement and post-settlement follow-up. Not surprisingly, payers don't always pay on time and in the correct amount. So when you are successful in negotiating an additional payment against them, you need to follow up with the insurance company to make sure that you're paid. Okay, so the next question here is, what is an assignment of benefits? The assignment of benefits is a very important document to ensure that you're paid. It's simply an arrangement by which a patient requests that their insurance payments be made directly to you. Any tips on the assignment of benefits? So I've given these tips a couple times before, but we're asked about it quite a bit. And with respect to the assignment of benefits, you want to ensure yours is well drafted. We're not offering legal advice, but here are a few of the items you may want to ensure are included. The first one is the assignment of benefits should assign the right to appeal and the right to receive relevant documentation as well as other rights. It should also refer to the provider as the patient's authorized representative, and should properly reference ERISA and a full and fair review of claims. So if your assignment of benefits is inadequate, it's another roadblock that the payers use to stop you from getting reimbursed on your out-of-network bills. Okay, so what about insurance companies paying initially but then recouping the money later? This is something that internally we call refund requests. And yeah, you should definitely fight these. At CollectRx, we handle this as part of our appeal service. So you're going to want to follow that same type of process. You want to make sure that you have the proper documentation, present the relevant data and arguments to why the payer should not recoup the money. And also be persistent in following up the payer, as I haven't said that for the 5th or 6th time during this presentation. All right, and now we'll turn to the last topic here, and it's third-party rental agreements, which we also sometimes call silent PPOs. So what is a silent PPO, or what is a third-party rental agreement? These agreements are signed not with an individual payer, but it's with a third party that contracts with a lot of payers. Now, think of this third party like a middleman of sorts. So they bring together payers and providers to participate in contracts that often are not favorable from a provider perspective for a number of reasons. Also, they are often offered to other payers and networks that the provider doesn't even know about. So that's why you sometimes hear them called silent PPOs. Now, they sound easy because with one contract, you essentially have a contract with all of the payers that are signed up on their network on the other end. Now, most providers, however, and we'll talk about this in a bit, they just don't understand how detrimental they can be. So just so you know, we can provide a complimentary analysis if you're in one of these agreements or if you're considering entering into one of them. So if so, you can just enter into your chat box that you're interested and we can follow up later. Next question here, how do I know when a third-party rental agreement is going to be applied? Unfortunately, you don't know. It's completely up to the insurance company to determine when they'll utilize it. And the decision is based on whatever pricing will yield the lowest payment to you. And it's either what the third-party rental agreement rate is or how the patient's policy defines out-of-network benefits. So even if a patient has a third party's logo on their insurance card, it does not necessarily mean that it's going to be utilized. All right, so the next question here is asking about why do many providers contract with third-party rental agreements or silent PPOs? And it's because it's easier. These third parties, they're selling the dream of reduced paperwork, decreased negotiation time, and quote-unquote consistent reimbursements with this one contract. But the reality is that there are many pitfalls they apply that result in these contracts being just another form of cost containment. I mean, think about it. How can it be so easy to negotiate this one third-party contract that now you basically have a contract with any insurance company that they utilize, but if you try to negotiate a contract directly with one insurance company, it takes months and it's typically at a much lower rate. All right, so why don't the payers always use my third-party contract? Now, these contracts, think of them as caps to your out-of-network reimbursement. So they will never reimburse higher than your contracted rate. So let's say you have a third-party contract for 70% of billed charges. Now, the claim that you're working on, if that policy would reimburse at 40% of charges, why would they touch the contract? They get to reimburse you at 40% instead of 70%. But if that policy reimburses at 80% of charges, then yes, of course, they're going to use that contract because now they're going to pay you less at 70%. So why does the EOB sometimes state that their third-party contract was used, but the bill was not reimbursed according to the contract? So these vendors, they write language in the contract that allows for reductions like usual and customary cuts, for reductions like usual and customary cuts, multiple procedure reductions and code edits that unexpectedly drive reimbursements downward. Another issue is that sometimes providers don't realize that the reimbursement levels are based on a percentage of the allowed amount, not the bill charges. So this means that payers first take a cut to arrive at the allowed amount, then they apply the discount to that lowered amount. So let's give an example. I'm going to throw out a bunch of numbers here, but try to follow along. And we're going to say that we have a bill with $10,000 of charges. We're going to have our same contract at 70%, but this is going to be of allowed charges instead of bill charges. So what happens first is that the insurance company, they decide what they're going to allow. And they decided that $6,000 seems to be a good allowed amount. Then they're going to take your 70% contracted rate, which yields a payment of only $4,200. And a lot of providers, they just don't realize this. They're thinking in their head it should be 70% of whatever the charges are and are expecting $7,000 instead of $4,200. Okay, how do I track if my third-party rental agreements are being applied correctly? You want to, again, check your EOBs. Many providers, they don't even track their payments to see whether they're being paid correctly. So it's hard to blame them as EOBs are written in such a way that makes them difficult to read. So once again, it's important that you check your EOBs to make sure you're being paid correctly. Why do I receive settlement offers when I have a contract? Now, another tactic that these insurance companies deploy is to try to beat a contracted rate by negotiating a lower rate. So, for example, they might have a third-party rental agreement, and again, we're going to use our friend at 70%. The payer will give the case to a vendor, seeing if the vendor can beat that 70% contracted rate. So even if they negotiate 60% of billed charges, this is a huge win for them. All right, and then I just want to give a word about outsourcing, and I know this is going to sound self-serving, and frankly it is, but providers should consider outsourcing to companies that are well-seasoned in the reimbursement arena. You may not always have the time, data, or expertise to be successful with out-of-network reimbursements. And if you think about the fact that the payers with their vast data and resources don't handle it themselves in-house, then you should at least consider it. All right, so in summary, we hope that I've answered some of your most frequently asked questions and have familiarized you with some of the intricacies required to successfully run an out-of-network operation. And I want to thank you for your time. I hope you found this session useful. I know I went a little bit over. Mackenzie, do we have time for any questions?
Yes, we do actually have a few minutes. So thank you, Richa, for that amazing presentation. We're going to go ahead and start the question and answer session. Please submit any questions you have by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. So we are close to the end time, but 3 questions have just come in that I think would be great to wrap up our conversation. So the first question is, why do you say third-party rental agreements are detrimental?
We say this because the insurance companies, I was kind of alluding to this before, they write language in the contract that allows for a lot of pitfalls. So I talked about earlier that they take reductions like usual and customary cuts to drive down reimbursements, but they don't bring you more patients. So if you think about it, okay, so with a traditional managed care contract, you give an insurance company a discount in exchange for patient referrals, but that just does not exist with out-of-network. Also, another thing with these contracts is there's something that we internally at CollectorX, we call it double dipping, and this means that they're taking the cut of a discount from you because of this contract, but they're also taking the higher out-of-network benefits as opposed to the lower in-network benefits with regular managed care contracts. So you're kind of getting hit on both sides there. But I mean, again, if you take a look at these vendor sites like MultiPlan, it says something like that they help healthcare payers manage their cost of care, and it's not you, the provider.
Great. Thank you so much for expanding on that, Richa. The next question is, You said the phone was the best way to negotiate, but what about portal?
Okay, so that goes back to that FAQ that I was talking about with the third-party portals and if it's good to sign up with them. So again, while it seems easier because there's no paperwork and it's faster because of the technology, you just got to remember that you're typically unable to counteroffer, and you can only accept or decline their offer and not really have a back and forth banter of why you should be reimbursed at a higher level.
That's helpful to understand. Thank you. So the last question is from an audience member who's looking to go out of network, but they want to know, what factors should I consider if I want to look at going out of network?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So you want to look at a number of things. I mentioned in the policy section that employer preference is the way that providers get reimbursed, right? So you're going to want to look at your employer mix. And you're going to want to see what type of policies they're purchasing. But you also want to know what the payer mix looks like in your geographical area, and if you're able to also look at, what in-network rates versus out-of-network rates are for, one of your or some of your more common procedures.
Great. Well, that is all the time that we have for today. I want to thank Richa and CollectRx for the excellent presentation and to our audience for participating today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.